look at the book of Daniel, chapter 3. Now, if you remember from chapter 2 dealt with Nebuchadnezzar having a dream of the metal kingdoms. And in chapter 3, we're going to look at the aftermath of that. So, in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had this dream of this great statue with a head of bronze, a head of gold, shoulders of silver, stomach of bronze, stomach and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and toes of iron mixed with clay. And that statue was hit by a little stone. That stone became a mountain and filled the entire earth. And Nebuchadnezzar forgot about all of that. He forgot about all the metal kingdoms. He forgot that his kingdom will be superseded by another and will be replaced by another. He forgot about all of that. All Nebuchadnezzar got carried away with is that there was this head of gold, the most precious metal. So of all the metal kingdoms, his kingdom will be the most precious, the wealthiest in his mind, the greatest in his mind. All right? So that, for some reason, sometimes God lets us know things, and instead of going a particular way, we get a big head and start to do craziness. And that's what this chapter is about. So let's get into it. Daniel, the book of Daniel, chapter 3. So reading from verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. So massive statue. Massive statue. A cubit is about, depending on the cubit, I believe the Babylonian cubit was about 18 inches, a foot and a half. So, this was a massive, massive, massive statue, about 90 feet, 80 feet, somewhere around there. And so he made this great statue. And continuing, he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, O nations and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, in symphony, with all kind of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." So Nebuchadnezzar got some revelation from God. He wasn't a Jew. He didn't even know Yahweh, and Yahweh chose to give him this revelation, because whether or not you believe in Yahweh doesn't stop him from being there. So sometimes Yahweh uses all manner of people, including people who don't know him, for his purpose. So Yahweh had let Nebuchadnezzar know the future, and instead Nebuchadnezzar got carried away with the gold head. So he made a massive gold statue. The Bible doesn't say, but more than likely it's a massive statue of himself. And everyone had to bow and worship this statue, because I am the greatest. I am the greatest. Alright? Shows you sometimes you get a revelation from God, and you let it go to your head, and you create chaos around you, and you bring problems upon yourself. But let's continue. So jumping down to verse 8. Therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar. Now the Jews that they are talking about are the administrators Shananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, which in this passage you'll see listed as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Because while they were good administrators, they were promoted to administrators, if you remember chapter 1. While they were good administrators, excuse me, while they were good administrators, at the end of the day, our final authority that we answer to is Yahweh. So the Bible instructs us as Christians to be obedient to the laws of the land. However, if the laws of the land say to go against Yahweh, we aren't supposed to be obedient to that. If the laws of the land say or worship someone other than Yahweh, or pay or do something that the Yahweh does not want, we're not supposed to do it. And whatever consequences come, whatever consequences come. But let's continue. So they spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. There it is. There it is. No matter what position you are in, you're supposed to serve Yahweh. You are created. We're never supposed to forget. The first thing it shows that God did according to man, he said he'd make him in his image. His image doesn't mean that God has 2 hands, 2 feet. No. His image means that God has made this being that he calls man. The Hebrew for man is Adam. And that Hebrew Adam comes from Adama, dirt. So the being that he has called created man, he's made him in his image, which means he's made him as his representative. Why did he make man as his representative? To let him have dominion, to manage this physical creation that God created, that Yahweh created. And you are, regardless of what you do, regardless of where you are supposed to remember that and keep that at the forefront of your thoughts and your actions. People are not going to like you for it. But you have to decide, who are you obedient to? People or Yahweh? Let's continue. So reading from verse 6, jumping out to verse 16. Right? So Nebuchadnezzar was angry. He called them in and said, hey, why aren't you doing what I said? I said you're supposed to worship this image. Why aren't you worshiping this image? So, from verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you on this matter. We're guilty. Alright? We have not worshipped this image. All due respect, king, we respect you. But our authority, our highest authority that we answer to is Yahweh. From verse 17. If that is the case, that being, if we have to pay consequences for not being obedient and loyal to Yahweh, because this entire chapter is about loyalty and where your loyalty lies and the consequences of that. So from verse 17, if that is the case, meaning if you have to kill us, our God whom we serve, Yahweh whom we serve, is able. Our Elohim, that word there, God is Elohim. Technically it's our gods, but okay. Our God whom we serve, our God, so is singular, by the way. Right? That our is basically singular. So our gods whom we serve, right, El- Elohenu, if that is the case, Nebuchadnezzar, Elohenu, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. He will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. So, whatever that gold image Nebuchadnezzar had set up, whether it was an image of himself, whether it was an image of his god Marduk, whether it was an image of um, um, whatever I think is the other god he paid homage to, with his name was Nebo, we don't serve them. We serve Yahweh. We're not disrespecting you, but we have to respect Yahweh. And if that causes you to take consequences or to take measures against us, our God is able to save us. But even if He chooses not to, we're still not going to do it. Because even if He doesn't save us today, He's going to save us tomorrow. Which we'll see later on in Daniel. But let's continue. So they made a stand. They made a stand. I am not going to go against what Yahweh wants. Sometimes it's difficult to live in this world and to not go along with the world and what the world wants us to do. We're supposed to go with what Yahweh wants. So what you're supposed to be learning as a Christian person is what Yahweh wants, because you need to know what Yahweh wants in order to go that direction. So these young men decided, we are going to stay faithful to what Yahweh wants and to not do anything or this great thing, which was to pay homage to anyone other than Yahweh, regardless of the consequences. So let's go forward. And from verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury. He was incensed. And the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men being Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and they were cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commands was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar was so mad. You know what? I'm not just going to kill you. I'm going to listen. Your bones will turn to ash. Heat up the fire. So much so that the guys I told to execute you, they died. They died listening to me. The guys who had to throw these guys into the furnace, they died listening to the command of a man. But let's see what happens. Well, we all know this story, but still, let's see what happens to the 3 men who chose to be loyal to Yahweh. And jump into verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spake, saying to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? And they, being his counselors, answered and said to the king, True, O king. And then Nebuchadnezzar said in verse 25, Look, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Or, a different translation will read, as the Son of the gods. At this time, in all of those countries in Mesopotamia, it was understood, or it was believed, that there were many gods. And there were some gods who could take form, who took flesh. The Israelites believed so also. And the Israelites believed so until AD 133. I go on YouTube and I see a quite number of people, Jews and whoever else, talking about there's no such thing as a Trinity. The Bible only talks about one God. There's nowhere in the Bible, if you've been listening to my videos, there's nowhere in the Bible that has monotheism. None of the books of the Old Testament has monotheism. None. Not a single one. There's the ancient Hebrews, prior to AD 133, when they decided to let's change this religion, because there were a number of sects. By the time of Jesus, there were about 3 main sects of Jews. There were the Sadducees. The Sadducees believed only in the Torah. They believed God created heaven and the earth, and God left the existence. So God, nothing outside the 5 books of Moses was inspired by God, and God doesn't really interact with man anymore after he created them. So when you die, that's it. So the Sadducees became very Hellenized, because in their minds, the best you can do is this life here. So they would go along with the authorities, right? And by the time of Jesus, the Sadducees made up the priestly class, which is why they were very happy to go along with some of the edicts of Rome, etc. The second major sect in Jesus' time was the Pharisees. The Pharisees didn't just believe in the 5 books of Moses, they believed in the entire Old Testament. They also believed in something called the Oral Torah, which they said Moses came up with, but it was hidden, which is why you'll see in the Bible Jesus talking about you've created traditions and put them above, right, the Word of God. Right? So they believed in the Oral Torah. The Oral Torah today has become into things like the Talmud and the Mishnah, etc., etc. Right? And they place the Oral Torah. They actually place this Oral Torah above the what's written in their Tanakh, in what we call the Old Testament. Then there was a third group. Now, finally, the Pharisees believed that God interacted with man, but that God went silent, around the time of the return of the exile. So by the time of Jesus, the Pharisees believed they didn't have any prophets and God was silent. And unfortunately, us Protestants believe the same stuff. All right, this stuff was passed along to us, that God stopped speaking. So after Malachi, there's a gap and God did not speak for 500 years. But if you know God, that's not how God operates. Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice." For you who are sheep to know the voice of the shepherd, the shepherd has to continually be talking. The shepherd doesn't stop talking. So if God is your shepherd, in fact the psalmist says, "The Lord is my shepherd." Yahweh Roai, the Lord is my shepherd. A shepherd doesn't stop talking. So the Pharisees, by the way, the Sadducees believe that when you die, after this life is over, you are annihilated, you no longer exist. The Pharisees, however, believed in a future resurrection. Okay? but they believe that God stopped speaking, so there are no prophets anything after Malachi, right? In that 500 years. Well, for us Christians, we latched on to that as well, some of us, and believe for the 500 years, which we call the intertestamental period, that there was no revelation from God. That's not the truth, because there's a third sect. Today we call that third sect the Essenes, but Essene is just a Greek word meaning healer. Why we call them healers is because they lived a lifestyle that caused them to live very long. There was a first century historian, Jewish historian by the name of Flavius Josephus. And Flavius Josephus, who spoke about Jesus and so many other things, and the wars between the Jews and the Israelites, particularly the wars that destroyed the temple. And Flavius Josephus spoke about these people that we call Essenes today. He basically stated they were known to be prophets. Remember that's important. They were known to be prophets, and that they lived to, on average, about 120 years, at a time where the average lifespan was 60, 70 years. They lived about almost doubling that, the average lifespan. They believed in herbal medicines, etc., so they were called healers or Essenes. And we see them in the Bible. If you remember when Jesus was, when Joseph and Mary were taking Jesus as a baby on the 8th day to be circumcised in the temple, etc., you saw people called prophets, people like Simeon and Anna, who it's stated were prophets, and they stayed in the temple all day teaching, etc., etc. Now, for them to be called prophets in the New Testament, they couldn't be Pharisees, because Pharisees believed that prophecy had ended 500 years before. They couldn't be Sadducees, because Sadducees believed that the only prophet was Moses. So they had to be a third sect, and that third sect were Essenes. So more than likely Simeon, Anna, and a bunch of other people who were called prophets, which would probably include John the Baptist, were all Essenes, which was the third sect of Jews. By the end, by 130 AD, right, the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and killed quite a bit of people. Flavius Josephus says over 1 million. Many doubt that figure, but many doubt that figure because it's difficult to think that there were 1 million people back then with others to spare, because the Romans obviously didn't kill all the Jews. I don't know, I was not there, right? But Flavius Josephus says they killed about 1 million. I don't know. So after the destruction of the temple, the priestly order didn't survive, because there's no temple, there's no sacrifices, and Judaism was based on sacrifice. So the only sect that survived after 133 were the Pharisees. And from those Pharisees, we got Pharisaic Judaism, which has become modern rabbinical Judaism. So that was the only sect of Jews that survived. The Sadducees didn't survive because there was no temple anymore. What about the Essenes? Well, what happened to most of the Essenes? The Essenes lived life, and you've heard me talk about Essenes quite a bit. The Essenes lived life waiting for the Messiah. In fact, the Essenes stated that the Messiah would come. In fact, they stated that the Messiah would be born, but he would be Yahweh. They stated that they prophesied that the Messiah would come before the end of, or he would come, present himself as king, and be killed before the end of the first Shemitah of the last Jubilee of the age. And I went into what all of that means in that 5-part series called The Return of the King. Jesus would have died. There are many who say it's 30, there are many who say it's 31, there's many who says it's AD 32. I believe it's AD 32. Either AD 32 or AD 33 is the last year of the first Shemitah of the last Jubilee before the end of that age, which ended in AD 75. So, Judaism, all that in my long-winded way was meant to say that Judaism changed after AD 133. But before that, what Judaism believed is that there's one God, Yahweh. But there's one God in three distinct persons. There's the Father, there's the invisible God in heaven, there's the Spirit of God, the Ruach Yahweh, right? The Spirit of the Lord, the Ruach Yahweh. And there was this Yahweh. So the Father in heaven, the invisible God in heaven is Yahweh. The Ruach Yahweh is the Spirit of Yahweh and is Yahweh. And there is this third person that sometimes becomes a man or takes the form of a man. And that person is all over the Old Testament. That person met Moses, that person met Abraham, that person was in the garden, that person was all over. That person met Joshua, and that person is usually called, excuse me, that person is all in the major and minor prophets, and that person is usually called the angel of the Lord, the Malach Yahweh. But while he's an angel of the Lord, he's not an angel, because he takes worship from others. Joshua worshipped him, Moses worshipped him, Abraham worshipped him. Angels, and by the way, if you remember what I said in the past, angel is not a type of being. Angel is a job description. All it means is messenger. But those beings that we like to call the angels, cherubim, seraphim, whatever, they don't, if they are loyal to Yahweh, they don't take worship from anyone. So the Jews believed in a God that takes form. So this is what Nebuchadnezzar was talking about. I see four men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God, or a son of the gods. Let's continue. And from verse 28, jump into verse 28. So, at this point, Nebuchadnezzar had the three guys come out of the furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar, at this point, he lost his big head. He got humbled because he thought, hey, I'm the big bad around here. I'm the ultimate authority around here. But he decided to use all my authority that a God has given me. Keep in mind, everyone then thought if I'm in authority, that means that God has blessed me. So he decided to use his authority, right, to kill these three guys who were loyal to their God. So in other words, I am above your God because you are my servants. So therefore I am more powerful than your God. And what happened? What happened? Yahweh showed you, hey, no you're not. I have use for these guys, so they're gonna live. I have something for them to do on earth right now, so they're gonna live. And you are not above me. I am above all. I am not just above you, I'm above all. So Nebuchadnezzar had them pulled out of the furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel. Remember, I just stated previously, he said there are four beings, and one of them is like the son of God. Now he's saying, who sent his angel? Who sent his messenger? Who sent his malach? Now, what I didn't mention before is chapter 3. is largely written in Aramaic. This is one of the books of the Bible, in fact, the only book of the Bible where a few chapters are written in Aramaic. So he sent his angel. It means the same thing in Aramaic. I believe it's the same word, malak. He sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word. What the king planned, their God is greater. So I humbly myself. They have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god but their own God. See, the king got a big head, but they decide, regardless of what happened to me, we yield our bodies. We yield everything to Yahweh. And they decide that they will not worship any god except Yahweh. And Yahweh stood for that, and Yahweh protected that. But as far as they were concerned, even if Yahweh didn't, I'm still not going to do this, because I'm not going to go against Yahweh, and I'm not going to lose. In the end, I'm not going to lose. And from 29, therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language that speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And as I stated a couple videos ago, they've actually found the scrolls of or the seals of one of these guys. The seals of a Babylonian court official by the name of Shanunu. Shanunu would be transliterated into English as Shaniah. They found this because Shanunu is not a Babylonian name. It's a Hebrew name. So how many high court officials of Hebrew descent would be named Shananiah and end up as an extremely high court official in Babylon? Stand for God. God will work stuff out, and one way or the other, God will promote you, because you never lose with Yahweh. Even if the world is collapsing around you, it seems like it's collapsing around you, but you will be fine. You will not lose with Yahweh. So, that's it for chapter 3. Look out for chapter 4, which I will try to drop as quickly as possible. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching and listening. Thank you, and God bless.